Perhaps the most discussed topic this weekend was the proposal to Ukraine from the United States, Ukraine's response, Europe's response, and Russia's opinion. All this feverish activity revolved, from my point of view, around 1 or 2 points out of those 28, according to some sources, or 26 according to other sources. But let's start from the beginning with the essence of the proposal that Vitkov took to Kyiv. First, Ukraine establishes its neutral status either in the Constitution or for 20 years. This status is held by Switzerland, Austria, Ireland, Iceland, Malta, Liechtenstein, Costa Rica, and also Turkmenistan. So it's not something completely surprising. Yes, quite a few countries have such a neutral status. Secondly, Ukraine undertakes not to deploy nuclear weapons and to limit the size of its army. But the number of military personnel allowed is twice as much as it was in 1922, namely 600,000 people in Ukraine. Someone said I had 150, but no, I checked several documents, so to speak, and they all say the army is 600,000 people. By the way, it's completely unclear how Ukraine will be able to maintain such a huge army. Perhaps Ukraine is counting on continued, so to speak, aid from the United States or the European Union. Third, if Ukraine wants to join the European Union, they would be complete idiots, of course, if they join, but I'm almost certain they would be complete idiots. For the Ukrainian leadership, it's a lot of money, but for the people, it's a disaster. I've discussed this before, so I won't repeat myself. Fourth, the United States and its allies are giving Ukraine security guarantees for 10 years. They can be extended or changed, but they're valid for 10 years. During these 10 years, an attack on Ukraine will be considered an attack on NATO. Probably, I don't know exactly which countries will be involved, whether it will be NATO or the United States plus a few countries, but in any case, it will be something like NATO. The fifth, the so-called paragraph 5, the fifth, the fourth. Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk regions are fully recognized as Russian territory. Ukraine will have to give Russia territory that Russia hasn't captured yet, and also the fourth. These territories are recognized as neutral, demilitarized. It means those that it hasn't captured. Buffer zone. But de facto they belong to and are controlled by Russia, so no matter what they are called, they go to Russia. 6. The division of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions takes place along the current line of contact. 7. Russia receives phased return to the global economy. That's what they wrote there. 8 out of 300 billion of frozen Russian funds. So how much is going there? Approximately 100 billion is going to compensate Ukraine for damages, and about 200 billion is going to the Ukraine Recovery Fund. With a profit of 50%, it will go to Russia, and the profit will go to compensate Ukraine for losses and war expenses. That is, Ukraine gives up 25% of its territory and receives $300 billion for reconstruction. Well, in various ways, yes, but still, $300 billion for reconstruction and 10 years of guarantees. Well, let's say the United States, Russia gets Donbass and Crimea and a gradual lifting of sanctions. So what did the European Union propose in response to this? First, Ukraine will not have restrictions on the size of its armed forces or its defense industry. I want to say that France has 200,000 servicemen and Britain has an army of 72,000 people. Why does Ukraine need more than 600,000, and who is going to support them? Well, it's completely unclear. Now, secondly, this is Ukraine, so what the Europeans say will allow it to host allied forces on its territory. Well, then, what's the point of not joining NATO? None. It's the same thing, right? Third, Ukraine is allowed to join NATO someday, though the timing is uncertain. So the very thing that made Russia nervous, right? Well, at least that's what they thought, that's what they said. Fourth, the most important thing probably is that the status of the captured regions is not being fixed, but is being discussed. And this is after the separation and the ceasefire. That means the war stops. And after that, we sit down to discuss. Honestly, I don't know. Usually all the participants in these kinds of situations, when they start winning, they want negotiations to take place at that time, and those who are losing want things to stop first and then negotiate. And fifth, all children and displaced persons return, they are exchanged. Well, that is to say, there is this kind of exchange of everyone who ended up on foreign territory. So Europe offered Russia exactly what Putin started the war for. NATO weapons on the border of Russia and Ukraine. They don't call it NATO, they call it SHMATO, but the weapons are the same. And there's the unlimited Ukrainian army, and the status of the captured regions is undefined. Well, this will definitely lead to a future conflict. Russian assets are frozen, but until Russians pay reparations. The amount isn't specified. Maybe they'll hear it's $1 trillion. They don't owe less. In fact, they owe more. But they, so to speak, also have a small amount, let's say, of brains between their ears. And the easing of sanctions is only possible after a long, unclear, stable peace. So Russians responded to this proposal, so what does that mean? A sharply negative reaction, let's put it that way, to the American proposal. They replied that they are ready to discuss it. So they were mostly satisfied, but something still needs fixing. For the European one, they said it wasn't hypocritical. Russia, represented by Peskov and possibly Senator Pushkov, they stated that they would not allow NATO missiles to be deployed near their border. So to speak, they will and they will. So to speak, they won't allow compensation to be calculated for Ukraine. They won't negotiate the status of the captured regions after a ceasefire is established, and so on and so forth. The Russians stated that Europe's proposal fuels the war rather than stopping it. Maria Zakharova voiced the position of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Europe's proposal is unacceptable. It is not aimed at solving the problems, as she said, that led to the war. The European plan lacks provisions about the war, about protection. This is all from Zakharova, about protecting the rights of the Russian-speaking population, repealing discriminatory laws, and stopping the persecution of the Orthodox Church. Everything they discussed at the start of the war. So, if they're not being offered this, why should they stop fighting if they're not losing? That's the question, right? If they're losing, then it's clear. If they're, let's say, equal or winning, then why stop if they've declared this as their goal? The United States has all of this in mind. What we talked about, things related to the Russian-speaking population and the church, things like that. Any attempt to adopt this European Union plan, the Russian Foreign Ministry said in an official communique, is doomed to fail and will only prolong the conflict. I'm not debating who's right or wrong, just saying someone is guilty. It's clear Russia attacked, but I'm only talking about what's happening with the European and American proposals and the reaction in Ukraine and Russia to these proposals. I'll say for myself that. So Europe, in my opinion, is trying to ensure that the bloodshed continues, all of this. Their goal appears to be prolonging the conflict. And for what reasons, I don't know. You can make all sorts of assumptions about that, but to pinpoint it and say, that's it, I can't. The Ukrainian leadership says they won't give up any land. Maybe they mean from the land that hasn't been captured. I don't know. But at least at first it sounds like not an inch of land, as they say. It seems that neither side is ready to make compromises, which means they are not ready for peace. If Ukraine rejects the United States proposal, then the Trump administration, well, most likely will stop military and financial support for Ukraine. At the very least, all of this will be significantly reduced, maybe even completely stopped. If Kyiv plans to fight, it will have to do so without the United States of America. Trump has given Ukraine a deadline until November the 27th. He said he wants an answer between November 24 and 27. I don't know until November 27. If there's no answer, then the United States. Well, that's how we understood it, that they will stop supplying weapons, intelligence, and money. Ukraine needs $45 billion of foreign aid every year. They spend $90 to $100 billion each year on the war, and about $45 billion needs to come from abroad. And without the United States, it will be impossible. Well, most likely less than half. And Ukraine will experience an acute shortage of missiles, artillery shells, and from their point of view, even bullets as well. That means the armed forces of Ukraine will be forced to stick to defense, that is, holding defensive lines without attacks, not even counterattacks. No offensives, only defense. Is that it? Is it always so bad? Ask any military person. Breakthroughs by Russian troops are possible in certain areas of the front due to Ukraine's shortage of ammunition, equipment, and the fatigue of its personnel. Ukraine will also lose a significant part of its budget support for salaries and pensions. There are military procurements, support, and other functions of the state. Main ones, not just other main functions of the state. Foreign currency reserves and gold funds will quickly run out, which will lead to the devaluation of the hryvnia, of course, inflation, and a reduction in social spending, The recovery will sharply decrease, the restoration of infrastructure will slow down, repairs of equipment and fuel procurement will also slow down. That is, well, some things without which it is impossible to live. The pace of mobilization will decrease, guaranteed. Even more people will flee and the morale in the army will drop. The risk of desertion? Yeah. Many experts estimate that 2 to 3 months without United States involvement will force Ukraine to take up a defensive position and slowly retreat until they come running to Trump asking him to stop the war. But the problem is that at that moment, Russia might already decide that it's more beneficial for them to push Ukraine to complete capitulation. A massive breakthrough and the capture of Kyiv. Well, that's not being predicted, because the territory, so to speak, is well fortified, from where they are now all the way to Kyiv. Yes, the army has learned a lot about fighting over these 3 years. And by digging in, they can hold the defense of the central part of the country for a long time. Russia's resources are also limited, actually. They have more. They're in Ukraine, but they are limited. Problems with mobilization. Besides, they have to hold on to the territories they've captured. That's why analysts don't expect Kyiv to be taken any earlier than in 2 to 3 years. And those 2 to 3 years would mean continuous fighting, if both sides are able to endure it, and only if Western support collapses, not just from the United States, but also from Europe, and if the morale of the soldiers falls, could this happen. Without a total refusal of help from Europe and a complete demobilization of Ukraine, even if the United States stops providing aid, Russia won't be able to reach Kyiv for at least the next 2 to 3 years. To do this, the Russians would have to capture major cities like Dnipro, Poltava, and Chernihiv. Tank production in Russia has decreased. Yes, I'm talking about armored vehicles. Equipped factories are reducing their workforce. There is a shortage of components due to the sanctions that, so to speak, have been imposed, are being imposed, and continue to be imposed. Production, except for ammunition and consumables, has decreased, so to speak. Despite this, Russia's disruptions are still not the kind that, so to speak, would make it stop. Rather, this suggests that Russia will not be able to carry out large-scale offensives. Large-scale offensives, I don't know how else to call them. What does all this mean? A years-long war of attrition with small advances into Ukraine, well, in one direction, deeper into Ukraine, grinding down equipment and manpower. Putin. In fact, he has one very, very big problem, which is called what now? After the war ends, he can't go home without a victory. 700,000 servicemen there, 200,000 directly on the front line, but the rest are, so to speak, around and moving back and forth. And most of these guys became, well, not most, but a huge number of them became soldiers during the war. I avoid using most. Many in this war became bandits and thugs. This will mean an increase not of those controlled by the Kremlin, but of the criminal environment. 500,000 people ready for anything, criminals ready for anything. Zelensky can't afford to end the war either. This means that within 3 months, he will be re-elected and immediately tried for large-scale embezzlement, wartime. That most likely means execution by firing squad. Europe doesn't want to end the war because the money that politicians make when allocating funds for waging wars is incomparable to anything else. And the main thing is you can't really check it. They make a report saying 100 tanks burned down, and there you go. $1 billion or so for them to split up, as they say. None of the participants have the slightest clue. There's no desire to put an end to this bloodshed except maybe in America. And that's why all those who lie to their people, well, they hate America, Trump. They hate because America might be able to stop this war. That's the way the cookie crumbles. Here you go. Please subscribe. By the way, hit the bell. I'm not done yet. I'm just taking a little break. And share it with your friends. That way you'll get awesome content on time, the kind I think no one else is giving you. It's amazing to me, though. Well, that's a fact. Now, we've just received Rubio's report on the negotiations with the Ukrainian side. I want you to listen.
Well, we've had a very good day today. I think we've made tremendous progress even since our last conversation. And I'm sorry for keeping you waiting, but there was still a lot of work to do. We began nearly 3 weeks ago with a foundational document that both sides discussed and agreed on, considering each party's views. And when you've been involved in this for 10 months, you start to understand well the priorities, red lines, and important issues for both sides. This allowed us to create a foundational document, which is the current working document. In fact, over the last 96 hours or more, there has been active engagement with the Ukrainian side, including our Minister of the Army and others who are in Kyiv, meeting with key participants across the Ukrainian political spectrum in the legislative and executive branches, as well as with the military and others. To clarify these points, we came here today with one goal, to take, 28 or 26 items, depending on the version as they developed, and narrow down those that were open questions. And we achieved that today in a very substantial way. Of course, like any final agreement, it must be approved by the presidents, and there are a couple of issues that we need to continue working on. But I think today's conclusion is this. I think today was worth it. This is probably the most productive day on this issue that we've had, maybe in all the time we've been working together, but definitely in a very long time. But the work continues. And since this is still a work in progress, I don't want to declare victory or the end just yet. One, there's still work to be done, but we're much further along today than we were when we started this morning, and much further than we were a week ago, that's for sure. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned that there are a couple of points.
Remain.
Could you clarify that? Questions? The details of these questions? This is a very delicate matter, and it's important. As I said, there is no agreement on them yet. Some of them are about semantics or wording, others require decisions and consultations at a higher level, and for others, I think they just need more time to be worked out. By the way, I'll note that we discussed some points from the original 28, or did it change? That was a work in progress. It's a living document that changes daily with new data, some were about stocks or the European Union or NATO and so on. And we kind of separated those because we had just met with national security advisors from different European countries. And that's something we'll have to discuss with them because it concerns them. We mostly focused on bilateral issues. There were a couple of nothing insurmountable. The open questions can be solved. We just need more time. I truly believe we will manage.
If we believe Rubio, then that means the remaining disagreements surmountable. See, he's saying nothing, no. He's basically saying ambush. But again, this is between the United States and Ukraine. Actually, Rubio said that he knows the mood of the Russians and that he has already spoken with representatives of the European Union, but he still hasn't officially spoken with Russia. And for that, as diplomats say, he needs to smooth out the main sharp corners and get the okay from the boss, from Trump.
So, Ukraine told you that it is ready for a compromise, for example, on key issues such as territory in exchange for peace with Russia. They hinted that they are ready. Well, I won't. Listen, this isn't to dodge the question. I won't go into details about the topics discussed, as this is still ongoing. Key points. For a proposal to exist, it must be written. That's what you need to know about how this works. If it's verbal, it's fleeting. Writing it down matters, but printing doesn't make it final. Here you go. Make corrections to it, then a new draft is made, either by you or as a counterproposal. More edits. It's a continuous process. There's still a lot ahead, so I won't speculate or go into details about specific points of the latest version of the proposal. Because honestly, by tomorrow or the day after, everything could still change. But I can tell you, I think I'm very optimistic that we can get something done here because we've made tremendous progress. Well,
that sounds optimistic.
Tell Trump how the Ukrainians feel about the negotiations. Today was the most productive day, I swear. He called them ungrateful. Well, we've talked to him since then, and I think he's satisfied with our progress reports. Senator, what about the Russian party? Did they want it? Clearly, Russians here are voting. So, well, look, we started from the early stage of this process, understanding the Russian position, which was conveyed to us in many ways. In the State Department, we receive a lot of written, unofficial documents and things like that. Also verbally, what they discussed over time and so on. So whatever we decide today, obviously, if we reach an agreement with Ukraine, we will have to present it to Russia. That's the other part of this equation, and they have to agree to it for it to work. And what about Thursday? What about the new deadline? Like, will there be a new deadline or a final deadline? We want to do this as soon as possible. We want it to be on Thursday. We would like it to be before then. But the main thing is, today we made significant progress. We moved forward well. So I'm very optimistic that we'll reach our goal in a very reasonable time frame, very soon. Whether it's Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday next week, we want it soon because of people. Until we resolve this, more people will die and more destruction will occur. Our goal is to end the war as soon as possible, but we need more time. Here,
we'll finish here. Rubio believes that the treaty will provide the necessary conditions for Russia to end the war. It may be a combination of American and European proposals, but most likely they are slightly revised. There are those 26 or 28 points that Vitkov and Rubio brought, and which I consider to be much more rational. If you want war, if you want the war to end, if you want the war to continue, then they are not rational. But if you want the war to end, then they are much more rational than the proposals put forward by the Russian side, the European side, and actually the Ukrainian side as well. There, it's just, well, emotions, naturally emotions, it's absolutely clear why. I hope so, yes. Everything is fine. Let's finish here and see you next time.